Oh, good afternoon. Welcome to the Abundant Wellness Podcast. And I am actually pre-recording this presentation earlier because I knew that this weekend, this Saturday was going to be a very, very busy Saturday for me. And to just make things easier and make things flow a little bit more smoothly, I decided I'm just going to pre-record this, but it will be played on the regular scheduled time. So I thank you for joining me today, and you will still be able to get the same, content pretty much lasting the same amount of time. This one might go a little bit quicker. And anyway, just to make sure we don't miss anything out and to just make my life a little bit easier. Every now and then that'll happen because there's going to be events or things that happen at the same time. And just to make things a little bit smoother, I just pre-record. I did it once last year because I had the opportunity to go meet Barbara O'Neill in person. So I was not going to lose out on that opportunity. So I only did it once last year. Maybe this will be the only time I do it this year. We'll see. Anyway, that you're here. Glad to be able to present to you and just meet with you. Maybe some of you meet with me regularly and look forward to this. So I wanted to make sure that I was there for you. It is my intention to be here every second and fourth Saturday of the month. And so here we are. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and share my screen so that we can get started. Okay. So again, welcome to the Abundant Wellness Podcast. My screen should be on your screen right now. And what's nice about when I record it, you can see my face at the side there. And so you get to hear me and listen to what I have to say at the same time and not just seeing my screen. So let's see how it goes. So again, welcome. So glad that you guys are here. The Abundant Wellness Podcast, it meets every second and fourth Saturday of the month at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. I am located here in Texas. So we are at the fourth Saturday of the month. And usually we're meeting every other week, but I think we got an extra Saturday in the month of January. So instead of meeting with you in 2 weeks, the next time we meet would actually be 3 weeks. So we get a little break. But if you look forward to hearing me and seeing me, you could always go back to the recordings. You could always go back to my YouTube channel as well, or just go back to, the Facebook, and you'll see the recordings right there for you. So thanks for joining me again. My name is Joanne McDermott. I am a board-certified functional nutrition and lifestyle practitioner, and I am also a mental health coach. Well, that's a bit of a mouthful. What do I do? I help people to find the underlying causes of their health challenges. What is really going on underneath there? What is brewing inside there that's making things worse? We get to the bottom of it. I'm like a private investigator. My approach is holistic because, we are all about our body and our mind, and we have a spirituality that is a part of us. I do Bible-based spirituality, and all of those components come together to make up who we are. And when one's off, the other side is off as well. When one's well, it makes the other one well. And so for that reason, my approach is holistic. And sometimes I have to tap into the psychology. Sometimes the reasons why we are sick is because past trauma, is happening that we haven't dealt with. So I try to tap into that as well. So that is what I do. I have to throw out my disclaimer before I start. The information provided is intended to promote overall well-being and is not a substitute for professional care that you may be receiving. So please, if you're seeing your doctor, whatever healthcare professional that you are seeing, please continue to go see them. I'm not here to be a replacement for that. Viewers are encouraged to be empowered by learning how the body functions, allowing them to take an active role in their own health goals and decisions. The more you know, the more you understand, the better informed decision that you can make. And, you have a right to be a part of the team player in determining what your health goal or what your choices are going to be. Sometimes we get some scary diagnosis, and sometimes we don't feel comfortable about what the options are. And I'm here to help you to broaden your options even more, understanding how your body works, and even learning some alternative, measures that you may be able to take. So let's go right into our topic. We are learning about blood sugar. For the month of January, we've been learning about blood sugar, blood sugar balance. We've been having a lot of sugar, in our diet the last couple of months, December especially, but even in November. So now we're past all of those holidays. Now we want to kind of have a fresh start, or we want to get our bodies back in tune. So I thought we'd talk about blood sugar. We talked about it the last time we met. We're going to go into it a little bit deeper, or a little bit more, touching it from a different aspect. In fact, I'm going to be talking a little bit about addiction, because people have asked the question, can you get addicted to sugar? Well, we're going to dive into that in just a moment. So let me continue. So what is blood sugar? I'm going to do a little bit of review based on what we had talked about the last time. So blood sugar is the amount or the concentration of sugar inside of your bloodstream. Now, there's always sugar inside of our bloodstream, in our blood. We need that sugar. And why do we need that sugar? Because when we eat the food and it gets broken down into its smallest molecules, there is a bunch of glucose molecules that are there. And do you remember what those glucose molecules do? Well, they go into our cells along with the oxygen. Those two come together, the glucose and the oxygen, and they form energy. That is what gives us energy, the energy to be able to sit and listen to me, to sit up, to walk, to do your work, to think. If you did not have energy, you would be very fatigued, you'd be very weak, you wouldn't be able to focus. So the sugar uses energy. The cells use sugar in order for you to get that energy. And in fact, it is your cell's number one go-to to get that energy, because we can also get our energy from protein and from fats. But the glucose, the sugar, is its primary go-to to produce that energy that our body needs. And where do we get that? Where do we get that sugar from? Well, we get it from the foods we eat. But I wanted to point out here that sugar isn't a bad thing. I talked last week about is sugar our friend and our foe? And I talked about sugar being our friend because it's how our body produces the energy, that we need to live, to survive. But believe it or not, when we look in the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, what was the very first food that God had provided and had created for us to eat? Genesis 1:29 says, I have given you every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Let me move my head away from that. All right. The Eden diet was a vegetarian diet because it just consisted of fruit. It was your blueberries and your mangoes and apples and bananas. It was just fruit. It was fruit. I don't know if you realize, but vegetables came into the picture later. That was after sin had happened, and the eating of animal flesh came even later, and that was after the flood happened. There was so much water along the surface of the earth, they couldn't, there was no access to any vegetation. There was no vegetation. And so in order for them to survive, the people that were in the ark, Noah and his wife and his 3 sons, and then their wives, they had to resort to eating meat, eating the animals that they took with them on the ark. So, but at the very, very beginning, before sin entered into the world, and when God first created the earth and created man and then woman, he provided food for them to eat. It was fruit. It was a sweet fruit. So imagine that the very first fruit that God created for us was sweet. It was a sweet fruit, right? Because there's some vegetables that are sweet, but the majority of the vegetables are not sweet, but all the fruit are sweet. But speaking about the first foods, let me go to the next slide here. When you think about a baby, a newborn baby, what is the very, very first food that he gets? Before you start spoon feeding him or her, the baby is eating the mother's breast milk, right? Or drinking rather. That's the very first food that they get. And they are on this. Some people do just straight breast milk for the first 3 months or 5 or even 6 months or even more, of a baby's life. Well, do you remember when we talked about the composition of the mom's breast milk? A big portion of it, a good majority, I would say definitely over 50%, maybe even like 70%, very high percentage of that breast milk is lactose, which is the sugar part of the milk. So a big part of it is sugar or the lactose, and then you have a little bit of fat, and then you have a little bit of protein, and then minerals. The vitamins, and nutrients and things like vitamins and minerals. So again, the very, very first food that is eaten is a food that is sweet. And it is the best food, for the baby, better than even any formula, that, other babies eat sometimes. And if you were to actually taste that breast milk, which I did because I was just very curious, it was sweet. So if sugar was such a bad thing, then why would it be the most natural food? Why would the breast milk be, or why would the breast milk have sugar in it? The breast milk, which is the most natural food for the baby, it has sugar in it. So there must be something good about that sugar. So that's why I was explaining sugar in it of itself is not bad. But what happens is we end up abusing that sugar. We end up eating it in excess. We have too much. And maybe we have too much of it in its more unnatural way, like the high fructose corn syrup. So when we have too much sugar and excess sugar, it can be a problem. It can cause us to get fatty liver disease, right? So fatty liver, it can happen not only because a person may be indulging in alcohol, drinking too much alcohol, you can also get fatty liver just by your diet and just eating too much sugar. And when we use a sugar for energy, as I had explained earlier, but now when we are not really very physical, we're kind of sitting around, we're not walking, and all this sugar has just built up in our bloodstream and our cells can't take it in or don't need it to use it anymore because we're not very active. It'll take it and it will store it someplace. And one of the places in which it gets stored is around the liver. Now, the liver does that naturally. It does store away some sugar, but if there's too much that's just being given to the liver to, okay, wait here, store some more because they're not using it right now, then there's just too much fat that is being stored around the liver. The liver it will take that sugar and it will convert it into a fat and store it. And then even sometimes even the liver gets just too overwhelmed. So that excess sugar that's turned into fat will end up being stored in certain fat deposits, and that is what leads to a person having a big belly like this. So it's not fat, it's sugar that's causing all of that. But excess sugar can also lead to diabetes. These are just some of the symptoms that occur when a person is experiencing diabetes. We're on the verge of being diagnosed with it, frequent urination, blurry vision, sometimes weight loss. And an excess of sugar can also tend to make us feel very fatigued and just this brain fog. So sugar, I was kind of explaining, it's our friend. When we use it wisely, if we don't use it wisely, it can certainly become our foe. All right. So I had explained at the very beginning, I threw out the question, can we get addicted to sugar? Can you get addicted to sugar like you get addicted to drugs, You can get addicted to certain prescribed medication, or people get addicted to alcohol. Can you get addicted to sugar? Is there such a thing? Well, yes, there is such a thing. Anything that changes our moods or alters our moods, anything that does that has the potential of us getting addicted to. So that's why people will get addicted to alcohol, because, when they drink that alcohol, if they're feeling kind of tense or they're feeling scared or nervous about something, they drink it and it just kind of, well, it lowers their inhibitions. It makes them a little bit more bold, might even help them to feel a little bit more relaxed. It has altered their mood. Or a person, when they're feeling a little bit nervous, anxious, they might pull out a cigarette and start smoking. It calms them down. Medications, antidepressants, you're maybe not feeling so depressed anymore. It's altering your mood. Well, sugar does that. In fact, there is something called emotional eating, right? We eat those certain foods and it makes us feel better. And a lot of times, those foods that makes us feel better, bringing us from a depressed state to okay, now I don't feel so depressed, altering our mood. A lot of times those foods tend to be sugar. So yes, you can certainly become addicted to sugar. So let's look at the reasons why we become addicted to sugar, or I should say, what causes that addiction to sugar, or that drawing, to the sugar. Well, one of the reasons is having an unbalanced gut flora. So when I say gut, I'm talking about your intestines, your small intestines, as well as your large intestines. And within the intestines are tons and tons of bacteria. There's good bacteria and the not so good bacteria, even though they both have their roles, but there's just so many. They say there's more microorganisms of cells, within the gut bacteria than there are cells within our body. So anyway, there is just a larger number of them. And we always want the amount of good bacteria to be balanced with the amount of bad bacteria. There should be more good than bad, but sometimes that balance gets thrown off for different reasons. It could be the way you're eating. It could be the amount of stress you have in your life. It could be because you're feeling a lot of anxiety or depression for one reason or another. But anyway, so these different things sometimes throw off that balance. And then what happens is you have more bad bacteria than you have the good bacteria. And when that happens, it just really creates havoc. It creates this yeast overgrowth. And that yeast within your gut, or that has been kind of produced because there's that overgrowth of the bad bacteria as opposed to the good, it causes you to, it leads to you craving the sugar, because bacteria, yeast, especially, what do they like to eat? They like to eat the sugar. They love sugar. So when you have a lot of yeast going on inside of you, that yeast is kind of in you, it's part of you, it makes you start to crave sugar as well. In fact, anytime the body is feeling like it's deficient in something or it wants more of something, you won't naturally crave it. Now, there's also a yeast infection that happens within the vaginal canal of a female, called a yeast infection, or candida. And again, that's just an overgrowth of the wrong, bacteria. And sometimes a woman will experience, a white discharge or itchiness. That is a yeast infection, and that will cause that female, that person, to crave sugar. Now, sometimes that overgrowth of yeast, or what we call thrush, will appear on the tongue. So just looking at those two pictures of the tongue there, the picture on the right is that tongue is pretty pink, right? But when you look on the left, it has like a white coating on top of it. That is thrush. That is an overgrowth of yeast, within that person's body. that right there is going to cause the person to uh, crave sugar or feel the need to eat more sugar and eat more and more and more. And so if you do notice that you have that white coating on your tongue, that should not be there. That's not normal. And you may have to you know, go through some measures, there's different dietary measures that you can go through to help get rid of that thrush. And when you do get rid of it, you'll notice that you will not be craving that sugar as much. So sometimes it's just something physiological, that's going on that's causing you to just crave that sugar. It's not always all about willpower. Willpower is only just a part of it. So what's another reason why we crave sugar? Well, sometimes it's simply because we are starving. If you notice this person is shaking a little bit, that's usually an indication of low blood sugar. Now, if we are not on a regular eating routine and we're just kind of eating and grabbing the food whenever, we're going to find that we get to a point where we say, man, I am hungry, I'm starving. And if you have busy days, at work or at school or wherever you are, where you can't just stop what you're doing and go get something to eat, but you kind of have to be without eating for a while. So you get to the point where you just get absolutely famished, absolutely starving. And when we are hungry like that, the first thing that we want to grab tends to be a sugary food, a cupcake, a candy bar, um, even those protein bars. Sometimes these are items that are high in sugar. We might even crave some kind of a carb. So it might be potato chips or, you know, um, again, any pastry, because those are high carbs. Anything made with flour is a high carb. It might be French fries. It might be a hamburger. But it's interesting how I want you to think about this. The next time you're starving, you're famished. It's interesting how we tend to crave the junk food. Okay, we feel like I need to go to that and I need to go to that now. I need to grab that. We're not when we're starving, we're not thinking about a carrot. I mean, even if you did eat the carrot, you might feel like, okay, this just did nothing for me right now. And the reason why that is, why you are craving the high carb food or the sugary foods, is because those foods are high in sugar. And the sugar, remember I told you at the beginning, the sugar is what gives you energy. So your body is looking for a means, a way to be able to get that sugar inside your bloodstream as quickly as possible. So if you're eating something that's high sugar, direct sugar, or you're eating some kind of a food that's what we call a simple carbohydrate, the sugar just enters directly into your bloodstream. It enters into there so fast. It's one of those foods that can enter into your bloodstream pretty quickly. And so your body's just craving that and it needs something fast because you are not feeling good right now. You're shaky, you're feeling weak. So you just need something that is very quick. So that's another reason why we crave sugar. So again, maybe not necessarily a lack of willpower, it's just your body is just trying to stay alive and it's trying to um, think about or get you to think about, okay, we need something, we need it now, and we need to be able to find something that is quick, before you faint, or before you fall over. Another reason why we just crave sugar so much is because we experience something called dopamine abuse. So let me explain a little bit about what dopamine is. So there's certain neurotransmitters that our body releases, from our brain, even from our intestines. There's a serotonin, there's an oxytocin, and then there's something called dopamine. So dopamine is it is that neurotransmitter that when it's released, it does give us a sense of ecstasy or satisfaction or pleasure. It is called the uh, reward hormone because when you're rewarded for something, it motivates you to want to do it again. So when there's this dopamine release and we experience this pleasure and this feeling of ecstasy, it makes us want to repeat that same behavior again. So this is the neuron here. The neuron are the cells specific to our brain, okay? And it releases these neurotransmitters. So here's an example of that neurotransmitter dopamine that's being released. And then it gets received by the receiving cell, by the receptors. So once it gets received, that is when we experience that feeling of ecstasy. Wonderful. Wow. You know what? I think I'll do this again because this gave me a really good feeling. Dopamine is actually a good hormone. It is what motivates us to practice that same behavior again. So there's lots of different times when this dopamine gets released. It gets released one of the time it gets released when we're eating. It also gets released when we are engaging in sexual activity. Now, this sexual activity is a good thing, kind of like the sugar, it's gotten a bad name. Sexual activity has gotten a bad name because we abuse it, but it actually is something that God created. In Genesis 1:28, it says, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Meaning, let's have more people on this earth and on this planet. He had designed us to engage in this kind of activity, but we have abused it, and that's when it started to get its bad name. It's good as long as it's not abused, because you see, we're not designed to be alone. We are social beings. We love community, and we actually thrive when we're in community. Sometimes we even get together to eat. We enjoy food. God has designed us to want to eat. We have enjoyed company, sometimes putting those two together, and we have fun and we enjoy ourselves, and it makes us want to do it again, because you know what? If we did not eat, what would happen to us? We would start to get malnourished. We will start to get unhealthy. We will start to get sick. It can even lead to death. Picture of the woman that you see on the left there is a person that is suffering from anorexia. Anorexia is when they just refuse to eat. And people, unfortunately, have been known to die because they just were pretty and insistent. They had made up their minds that they were not going to eat. And anyway, it's a little bit more than that, but they had made the decision to not to eat. And the picture of the person, the little baby, the child on the right there, due to unfortunate situations where he lives and maybe a famine in the land and there's no food provided to eat, they get very thin, and a lot of times these little children die. So it's very clear that food is what keeps us alive. It's important for us to eat. If we do not eat, we will die. And so God has created us in such a way that food and eating becomes pleasurable, so that we do eat. We do continue to eat, and we thrive, and we stay alive. So, you know what? There is some unnatural ways to release that dopamine, and then there are some natural ways to release that dopamine. So some of the unnatural ways is like TV, or watching pornography, or engaging in that kind of activity, or drugs or alcohol, video games, eating foods that are high in caffeine. So that would be like some of your sodas, or your coffee, or even chocolate. When we engage in this type of activity, it will release dopamine, but it is an unhealthy release, or unhealthy way of releasing dopamine. It will bring negative consequences, poor health, into our lives. What we want to do instead is to engage in a dopamine release that is natural. And so that could be reading, enjoying a good book. It could be meditating on the Word of God and be encouraged by His promises. It could be sitting out in nature and just enjoying the trees and the mountains, or even exercising. These activities will release dopamine, but it's in a more natural way and it's in a more healthy way. It's it's activities where we do not get addicted, whereas the unnatural dopamine release, we do tend to experience some addiction from that. So another reason why we crave sugar, we're so drawn towards it, is because sometimes some of the foods that we are eating are hyper palatable. Palatable meaning the taste to it, hyper, just like over and above, extensive. The food industry, they are very clever, is a nice way of putting it, in the way they have put these foods together and have packaged it and have created it for its consumers. There's a group, that comes together and they meet, and they're always trying to strategize on how to make the consumers buy more and more and more of that food item that they're selling. So what they do is they make that food hyper palatable. So in other words, they are adding extra salt and extra fat and extra sugar to the food, more than what's necessary, maybe even more than what we're used to. But they introduce that to us, and whew, we get a real high dopamine release from it, so that when we stop eating it, then and we're not getting that experience anymore, we we don't want to remain feeling like that. We feel like, oh man, something's missing, and then it makes us want to continue eating another one and another one. And that's why Lay's potato chips came out with the "but you can't just eat one." And it's true. Have you found yourself eating a bag of potato chips and man, you just can't eat one? You got to eat another one and another one. And that's just that overstimulation of that dopamine release, and making things extra, extra sweet does that as well. So you get so used to that high dopamine release that if you eat something that doesn't quite have that same amount of fat, sugar, or salt in it, you're not getting that satisfaction, you're not getting satisfied, and you're looking for that same feeling that you've had before. So you resort to something that is extra sweet, extra salty, or has extra fat on it. Now, another reason why we might be drawn to sugar is because we might be experiencing a time in our lives where it might have had a bad day where you don't feel so good. You ever had that? Maybe bad experience, got in trouble at school, got yelled at from your boss, very, very bad argument with your partner. I mean, it could be anything, heard some bad news, a diagnosis of a loved one, or even yourself. I mean, it could be anything. And you just decide that you don't feel good. You feel awful. You feel bad. You feel sad. You feel discouraged. And you don't want to feel this way anymore. You just, it's just too uncomfortable, or it's too painful. And so you desperately think and look for ways to get out of this feeling. And a lot of times we end up getting caught up in what's called emotional eating, right? So I want you to think of, the last time that you just felt awful, you felt sad, you felt frustrated, and what did you resort to? Think about what you resorted to. Now, it's going to be different for all of you here, but there's going to be some of you here that resorted to food. You thought about food. And what food did you think of? Did you think of the carrots and the apples? Did you feel like if you ate a carrot, you were going to feel better? No, you probably did not think of the carrot or that apple, though I think it looks pretty delicious, but you probably didn't think of that, right? You probably thought of that candy apple or that caramel apple with the M&Ms, with the chocolate, because these are foods that have lots of sugar inside of it. And remember, I was explaining earlier that that sugar, um, it gives an overstimulation and over production release of the dopamine. That dopamine gives you that ecstasy, feeling of ecstasy, or that feel good. And man, I want to do this again. So that is why when you are feeling that extra sadness, frustration, discouragement, you might tend to go and reach for that sweet food, even if it was not a candy apple or a caramel apple. It might be a chocolate cake or it might be ice cream, because as a result, direct result of eating that sweet food, it released dopamine. Now you don't feel so sad. Now you don't feel so miserable. It made you feel a little bit better. That's another reason why we crave that sugar sometimes. It's a coping mechanism. But sometimes people don't even resort to something sweet. Sometimes they will resort to some drugs or alcohol or smoking. Um, and because it's creating that dopamine release, that dopamine release makes them feel good. And they are desperately wanting to get out of feeling bad. And so they're going to go to what they did before and what worked before. So unfortunately, when we engage in this kind of activity, we have learned ways of coping that aren't the healthiest, but there's good news. We can learn more healthier ways of dealing with difficulties and challenges and struggles. And, when we're not feeling good, and there's something called neuroplasticity and within the brain, and all that really means is we can change the way we think, and we can change the way we respond or react to difficult situations. So anytime we engage in a certain behavior, when this happens, I do that. When that happens, I do this. So for example, when I get stressed, I just want to pull out that cigarette, or I just want to eat that chocolate cake. So that this is a pathway that was created in our brain. And every time we feel those negative emotions, we follow that pathway, because that is a clear pathway that's been paved out in our brain. But we can create a new pathway so that the old pathway gets overgrown and is no longer a pathway, and we go the other way. That is really what we call creating a new habit, a better habit, a new habit. And we are able to do that. We are able to get rid of our old habits and create new habits. And that is what's called neuroplasticity. It's like, when you think of plastic, it's bendable, it's flexible. So it's not like just staying in the same position, or it's not like there's an inability to bend it. So that's our brain. It has the capacity to change. It's flexible. And so if you have engaged in these less than healthier ways of managing the stresses in life, you can learn a new way. It's just a matter of learning what those tools are, getting with somebody, a coach, a counselor, and helping them and allowing them to help you to create that new pathway. Sometimes you just need that support. So I want you to know and realize, I hope that I was able to point out that sometimes those sugar cravings that we get, it's not always just about not having enough willpower, but there's other things that's going on within inside our bodies, mentally, emotionally, and physiologically, that just leads us to that natural uh craving or desire to want that sugar. So just working with those, putting things back into place, putting things in balance, it can significantly reduce our cravings for sugar, so that we are um, getting the right amounts of sugar and the right types of sugar. So I want to thank you again for joining me to the Abundant Wellness Podcast. Again, we meet every second and fourth Saturday of the month at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. So I will see you again in the month of February, the second Saturday in February. As I said earlier at the beginning, instead of 2 weeks going by, I think it's going to be like 3 weeks that go by because we have that extra Saturday in the month of January. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and it was a pleasure again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and God bless. I would like to invite all of you to take a look at my website. You can learn a little bit more of what I do. And if you have any questions, something that I've mentioned, feel free to call me, send me a text, or also on my website, you scroll down and there's a place where you can schedule a free consultation. So just let me know. I'm here for you. Well, you take care and God bless you.